Well, hello there, friends. Back again for another reading of my favorite book, How to Eat Fried Worms. I got a letter in the mail from a student who said, Miss Roosma, what's your favorite book? So, when you come, just know, I read your letters that you guys are sending to me. So, Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. Alan and Joe stopped in the orchard by the pile of fresh dirt. You think that he's going to be able to do it? Asked Alan, biting on his thumbnail. I don't know, said Joe. He can't do it, said Alan. How could anybody eat 15 worms? My father'll kill me. $50. He ate that one awful easy. Forget it, said Joe. If he doesn't give up on himself, I think I'm going to figure something out. We could spike the next worm with a pepper. He'd eat one piece and then another. Talking to Tom, then all of a sudden he would sneeze. Ga-choom! Then he'd sneeze again. Ga-choom! Then again. Ka-choom! Ka-choom! A faint look of panic would creep all over his face, like he's beginning to wonder if he's ever going to stop, and then he would clutch his stomach. His eyes would begin to water. Ka-choom! Ka-choom! Billy's awful stubborn, said Alan. Even if it was killing him, he might not even give up. Ka-choo! Ka-choo! Cried Joe, and he falls to the floor. I would bend over him, and he would say, oh, and then I would say, well, maybe we need to call his mom. Maybe it's a word I've never read before, so if I butcher it, I'm really sorry. Maybe it's the troglodiocrosis. Weirdest word I've ever heard of in my whole life, and no, I do not know what it means. His eyes bleat up at me. Ka-choo! Remember that business last summer, said Alan, gnawing on his thumbnail, when it was 95 degrees in the shade, and I dared him to put all of his winter clothes and his father's raccoon coat and his ski boots and walk up and down Main Street all afternoon? Ka-choo! Ka-choo! They went off through the orchard, Joe sneezing, sighing, rolling his eyes, pretending to be Billy suffering from a dose of peppered worm. Alan moaning to himself about how stubborn Billy could be. $50. Chapter 6, The Second Worm. Billy sighed. On the plate before him lay the last bite of worm under a daub of ketchup and mustard. What's the matter? Asked Tom. I don't know, sighed Billy, and he picked up the fork again. Does it taste bad? No. I just taste ketchup and mustard mostly, but it makes me feel sort of sick. Even before I eat it, just thinking about it. He sighed again and then glanced at Joe and Alan, talking to each other in whispers over by the window. What are you whispering about? Nothing. Then why are you whispering? Nothing. It's really not that important. It's just something Joe's father told him last night. Well, what? Come on, finish up. It was nothing. We're going to miss all of our cartoons. Billy shut his eyes, popped the last piece of worm into his mouth, chewed, gagged, clapped his hands over his mouth, toppled backwards off the orange crate, sprawled on his back in the chaff, and he gazed peacefully up into the ceiling. Joe and Alan stood over him. Open up! Billy opened his mouth. Wider. Do you see any, Joe? Nah, I think he swallowed it. Okay, let's go. Chapter 7. Red crash helmets and white jumpsuits. After the movies, Tom walked home with Billy. Tomorrow, I'll roll the crawler in cornmeal and fry it like fish. It's not really the taste, said Billy. It's more the thought. Like, at the point that I start to eat it, even though it's like smothered in ketchup and mustard and grated cheese, I just can't stop thinking about a worm. Worm, 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 worm. Gaggles of worms and bait boxes drowned. Worms drying up on sidewalks. Worms squirming on the fishhook gores into him. The soggy end of a worm draggling out of a dead fish's mouth. Robins yanking worms out of the lawn. I can't stop thinking about worms. Yeah, but if I fry the worm in cornmeal, it's not going to look like a night crawler, said Tom. Maybe I'll put parsley around it and some slices of lemon. And then you can concentrate and think it's just fish. All the time you're waiting in the barn, all the time you're eating it, just keep saying to yourself, fish, 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 fish. Here I am eating fish. Really good fish. Trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Dace, tuna, haddock, trout. Wait till you hear the minister shout. Fish, 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 fish. Shark, haddock, sucker, eel. I'll race my father in his automobile. Eel, flounder, bluegill, shark. We'll race all day till after dark. Billy then started to finally cheer up. Think how they'd all stare. I'd rev up the aisle, zip around the front pews, down a side aisle under the stained glass windows. My parents would kill me. Reverend Yardard peer down over the Bible stand. William, he'd cry. William, you take that engine out of here this minute. Yeah, and then they'd all start chasing me out to the church. Billy laughed, and then he said, waving their arms and yelling, and we'd lead them zigzag round and round out among the gravestones and the monuments and the cemetery, and then we would roar down the Sandgate Road, leaving them draped over tombs, panting and shaking their fists. Dancing around, Tom danced around and boxed up into the air. And then that Monday, we'd smuggle it into class disguised as Raymond's welly. Because, well, we could hide it just in the coat closet. And then when Millie Butler said anything at all, even something like, excuse me, or even if she sniffed, we'd dump a whole bottle of ink over the top of her head and run for the coat closet, overturn all the chairs and desks behind us just to slow up Mrs. Howard. And then she would come after us, fuming, mad, and shouting threats. And suddenly the doors of the coat closet would slam open and out we would roar on our mini bike in blood red crash helmets and white jumpsuits, and our scarves would be flowing out behind us. And then we would roar round and round the classroom while Mrs. Howard knelt among the overturned desks and chairs, sobbing helplessly into her hands. And then she would run out the door and up the hall and thumbing the noses at the monitors, brackety brack up the stairs, stiff-arming tacklers into Mr. Simonson's office, up onto his desk, and we would just broom, and then the motorcycle would backfire in his face, and we would zoom right out the window as he falls backwards in his chair in a hurricane of quiz papers and report cards, and then crunch, we would land in the driveway in front of the school, and we would roar down the highway to Bennington and join the Navy. So then Mr. Howard, or Mrs. Howard, and Mr. Simmons and our parents wouldn't be able to punish us. Side note, that was one of the craziest stories I've ever heard about a mini bike in my whole life. Chapter 7, I think it is what it is. 8? It's probably chapter 8. I can't remember. I've lost track. The third worm. Tom ran out of the kitchen of Billy's house, holding the sizzling frying pan out in front of him with both hands. The screen door banged behind him. Alan threw open the barn door when he saw him coming. Tom thumped the frying pan down on the orange crate. There, he said breathlessly. Done to a T. Look at her. All golden brown and sizzling. Man, that looks good enough to eat. Yeah, said Billy. He poked the worm with his fork. Tom took off the potholder glove he was wearing. Just think. Fish. Remember, think fish. Trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Eel, salmon, bluegill, trout. Wait till you hear the minister shout. Clam, flounder, tuna, sucker. Look out, here we come, old Miss Tucker. Lobster, black bass, oyster, stew. There goes New Orleans, here comes Peru. He leaned over Billy and whispered, in his ear. Fish, 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 fish. Go on, take a bite. Fish, 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 fish. Okay, second bite. Fish, 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 fish. You get the clue, right? Next chapter, The Plotters. Geez, you think it's gonna work? Said Alan to Joe. Suppose it doesn't. He didn't seem to pay much attention today. Don't worry, said Joe. We've got him thinking. It takes time. It all got doped out. Trust me. I wonder what they're plotting about. The fourth worm. Getting a little bit dark. Billy ate steadily, grimacing, rubbing his nose, spreading more horseradish sauce. Tom bent over him, hissing in his ear. Fish, 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 fish. Billy paused, watching Alan and Joe whispering by the door. He swished the last bite around and the ketchup and the mustard, and all of a sudden he says, "That's just not fair. They can't act like that anymore. Every time I swallow, they lean forward as if they're expecting me to keel over or something, and then when I don't, they look surprised and shrug their shoulders and just nudge each other." "Come on," said Joe. "Cut it out. We can watch you, for cripe's sake. We're just standing over here by the window watching you." "No, you are not," said Billy. "You're whispering and acting as if you would expect something to happen every single time I swallow." "It's nothing," said Joe. "Forget it. Look, we're going to turn around. We'll look out the window while you swallow." "What do you mean it's nothing?" said Billy. "What's nothing?" "Oh, come on," said Alan. "It's just something Joe's father told him the other night. It's nothing." "What? What is it?" "It'll just worry you. It's crazy. It's nothing. Seriously, just forget about it." Billy tore the napkin away from his throat. "I said, tell me." "It's nothing," said Joe. "You know how my father is. He's always yelling about something. Tell me, or all of this is off." "Well, look, I'm serious. It's nothing. Well, the night before last, I was telling Janie about you eating the worms, and well, my dad was on the porch and he heard us talking. So he threw his newspaper down and he says, 'Joseph?' So I says, 'Yes, Pa.' And he says, 'Have you ate a worm, Joseph?' And then he grabbed me by the shoulders and he shook me till my hands danced at the end of my arms like puppets. 'It's for your own good,' he says." So I stuttered out, "It's not going to do me any good if I shake to pieces, is it?" Janie was bawling her eyes out, and my mom was chewing on her apron in the doorway. "Alfred, what has he done? You can't do that to him. Has he hauled down the American flag at the school and eaten it again? Has he?" "So what's the point?" yelled Billy. "Get to the point. What's it all have to do with me?" "I'm getting to it," said Joe, wiping his nose. "But I wanted to show you how important it is that my father nearly killed me and all." Achoo! And then Alan began to sneeze and finally had to hobble off into one of the horse stalls, hugging his stomach to recover. "Anyway," said Joe, wiping his nose again and hitching up his Levi's. "So my father told my mother he thought I had eaten a worm." "A what?" says my mother, dropping her apron and clutching the sides of her head. "A worm," says my father, nodding solemnly. So my mother fainted, collapsed all helter-skelter right there in the doorway, and lay still. Her tongue lolled out of her mouth, her red hair spread out beautifully over the doorsill, and "Will you just cut it out?" Billy yelled. "Who cares about your mother? What does she have to do with me?" "I think he's lying," said Tom. "Whoever heard of somebody's mother fainting and her tongue hanging out?" "All right," yelled Joe, stomping and apologizing. "All right. Now I won't tell. You can die, Billy Forrester, or you'll have to carry him home, Tom growled, all by yourself. Nobody says to me, who cares about your mother, all right? I'm going, said Alan. They're insulting my mother, and I'm going. Don't, said Alan, running out of the horse stall and grabbing Joe by the shirt. Don't. You've got to tell him. Even your mother would say so. Mine too, no matter what he said. Ain't it a matter of life and death? I won't, said Joe, starting to the door. Alan pulled him back. You've got to. How long have we known poor Bill? 6, 7 years? For old time's sake, Joe, because we were all once in kindergarten together. Think of the agony he's going to face, Joe, the pain and the blood and the gore. Billy was on his knees by the orange crate, wringing his hands, not daring to interfere. But when Joe glanced sullenly back at him, he whispered, Please, Joe, for old time's sake. Well, will you apologize for insulting my mother? I do, said Billy. I do. I apologize. So Alan and Joe began to sneeze all over again, and this time had to bend over and put their heads between their legs just to recover. Tom, who had been watching them very suspiciously, might I add, was trying to make out what was going on and started to say something. Shh, hissed Billy fiercely, turning on him. You keep out of it. So Joe went on with his story and how his mother had been carried upstairs to her room, how the doctor had come, shaking his head, how his aunt had sobbed, pulling down all the shades in the house, and how that morning his mother finally came downstairs for the first time, leaning on his aunt's arm, pale and sorrowful. How... Yeah, said Tom. Sure. So why? What does eating worms do to you? Well, nobody will tell me, said Joe, opening his eyes wide. It's been 3 days now, and nobody will say a word. It's just like the time my cousin Lucy got caught in the backseat of her father's Chevrolet with the encyclopedia. Nobody will tell me why there was such an uproar. He wiped his mouth. But one thing is for sure. It's worse than poison. Probably. Nuts, said Tom. Oh, yeah, said Joe. But then he and Alan had another sneezing fit. They sprawled helplessly against each other. Look at them, said Tom to Billy. They're not sneezing. They're laughing. Come on, eat the last piece. Let's get out of here. Do you really think so? Said Billy doubtfully. The sneezing did look an awful lot like giggling. Sure, just look at 'em. Tom gave Alan a good and Joe a shove. They collapsed in a heap, sneezing uncontrollably. Billy watched them. Yeah, they weren't sneezing. They were definitely laughing, right? Hay fever, gasped Alan. Hay fever. You've never had hay fever before, said Tom. How about yesterday or the day before? Come on, Billy, open up. So Billy, half believing Tom and half not, glancing doubtfully at Alan and Joe, allowed Tom to poke the last bit of worm into his mouth and lead him out of the barn. Alan and Joe sat up. It didn't work, said Alan. Joe began to brush the chafe out of his hair. You wait. He wasn't sure. Tom was, but he isn't eating the worms, so you wait. Billy's worried. He was before. That's why he said he felt like he was going to throw up, but now he's really worried. Suppose I wasn't lying. Did you see his face when I said my father shook me? I thought his eyes were going to pop right out of his head. Alan laughed. Oh, yeah, and when you said your mother fainted, Joe stopped brushing the chafe out of his hair. Except, why'd you laugh so much, for cripe's sake? If you kept a straight face, even Tom wouldn't have guessed. You laugh first. What do you mean? Me? I laugh first? I did not. You did so. You laughed when he yelled at you the first time. You wiped your nose. They went off through the meadow, arguing. And that, my friends, is where I'm going to end for this evening. Have a good night. I hope you enjoyed.